Welcome back to West Texas View.
We're glad to have you for this final segment of our programs on real estate. And in our market today, our volatile market today, this is a very appropriate program to have. And in this last few minutes, I want Geneva to first of all tell us about anything else we need to know about buying and selling houses, and particularly about capital gains situations.
Well, of course, nowadays a senior will not have to pay any capital gains on their home. They sell it.
Even if they've sold another one before?
I'm
not sure about.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure
either,
about that one.
Because that's changed.
I know. Your accountant can verify that.
Yes, that's exactly
but
right.
I would like to say that this is definitely a time to buy because interest rates are so low, around 3.5% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and around 2.5 or 2 3/4 for a 15-year loan. So this is lower than they have been since way back before World War II. And so it is a wonderful time because with that interest rate lower, you're going to get more house for the money. So you'll be able, if the interest rate is up, you're going to buy less house because of the payment.
That's right. And a good thing on that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, is that a lot of these new loans that are very, very low don't have any don't have a prepayment penalty.
That's true.
So if you decide that you want to pay it off early, you just pay it off.
That's right. There is no prepayment penalty.
And that
on
is
them, so.
that is an excellent excellent way. When you're looking at things that realtors need to know, tell me other things that you wish that our buyers and sellers knew before they came, or things that you've had to teach them, whether it's an old seller, a new seller, a new buyer, or an old buyer.
Well, pretty much, your market changes from one time to the other. So a lot of times, for instance, back when I first came into real estate, interest rates in Texas had a cap of 10%. Interest rates were higher than 10%. So we had a problem trying to get people into homes and find mortgages, find ways for them to buy homes. I did, back during those days, I did some wraps where I would, the mortgage on the property maybe was 5%, interest rate was like 9%. So the seller could carry that paper, carry the equity on that home and do what they called a wrap. So the seller got the difference in the 5% and the 9%. So he got money on money he did not even own.
Good.
So, things like that, we just had
you had to be creative during those times.
Very creative back during those times. And
well, do you ever recommend to a seller to finance the property, to self-finance it?
There are times, yes, I have, and there's times in the past that it was necessary in order to get the property sold.
Or second liens or something like that. Again, that's your creativity. If you've got a buyer that's really eager and a seller that's really eager, then you may have to...
You've got to find a way, to finance that property, and that's where a good realtor comes in, because a lot of them don't know to do that. And on this wrap that I was talking about, this particular one, I knew the guy could afford to do it because I knew the person, but his real estate agent was fairly new, and I took her the contract, and she didn't know what to do with it, and so he turned it down. So we tried a different way. We tried 2 or 3 things to get the owner to carry or do something. And so I wrote up another one, and I asked her another contract, and I said, do you mind if I go with you to present this contract? And she said, okay, but don't say anything. I said, I'll just be there to answer questions. So we go over to the owner's house, and he's looking at the contract. He doesn't really care for it. He looks at me and he said, Geneva, tell me about this wrap.
Yeah, because he probably never even heard of it.
Right. He didn't know what it was. So the more I started telling him what it would do for him and him putting a pencil to it, he liked it. And so he asked his realtor, he said, "Where is that contract?" And she said, "It's back at my office." It's about 11 o'clock at night. He said, "Would you mind going and getting it?" We got the contract signed that night.
About midnight.
About midnight, and it was,
Long
you know,
day.
so, and I've just, you know, it's just been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I love a challenge. I love figuring things out and putting things together, and a lot of that you have to do in real estate.
Well, do you find that people who are buying property, speculation for rent property or something like that, that they are easier to deal with or harder to deal with? Investors, in other words.
Investors, well, it kind of depends. They have, they're just looking at the money part, basically. And I have had several investors that I have sold numerous properties to over the years.
And as you get to know them, if something comes on the market, you say, "Look, this is a good piece of property."
That's true. And a lot of times they don't even have to go look at it. They just tell me to write up the offer. I had one that was just would write up the offer and take it to my wife to sign. Told her to give you an escrow check, and would not even see the property until after it closed. But that's, you know, because they knew
you had a relationship with them. In other words,
I knew what they were looking for, and they knew it. So, and they trusted me to, you know, not to, you know, steer them wrong.
Yeah.
So,
and I understand that more and more, even younger people are beginning to do that as a way to build up their net worth, and so they're getting into the house rental business.
Oh yeah, and that's a job too. And there's a lot of times you can buy your property. If you don't have time to manage it, you can get a management company. We've
just got a few minutes left, and I want us to talk about the real estate profession a little bit, and whether you would advise people to go into the real estate profession, and if so, what do they have to do? I know that they've increased the number of hours that's required. Do you have to have a college degree now?
Almost have to have a college degree.
I knew that the hours had really been, but most community colleges have a course.
Yes,
and
do offer that, and then you have continuing education.
This has been so much fun having Geneva here to talk to us about real estate, and I hope it's raised some questions for you. And if you have any more questions, call me and I'll get you in touch with Geneva. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us for News West 9's West Texas View with Johnny Lou Avery. This has been a public affairs presentation of KWAB-TV and KWES-TV.